Hi everybody, my name's Andrew, and today I'm driving, once again, finally on the channel, my Mazda ND Miata RF. And that's because today's video is actually going to be a little bit different of a format. It's not a review as such. It's actually not quite a vlog either, though. Effectively, what we're going to be doing is talking about my experience thus far renting this car out on Turo while I go to Costco and a few other errands to get this car ready to go out on a rental tomorrow. So, with that said, for those that are unaware, I actually began renting this car out on Turo in December of last year, sort of initially just as a way to potentially cover expenses over the winter while I wasn't driving it as much, and kind of just to see how it did, you know? And if you're not familiar, Turo is essentially the Airbnb for cars. It's a peer-to-peer car rental or car sharing platform, rather. And online, there's no shortage, of course, of both positive and negative reviews and stories and all sorts of things about Turo. Now, prior to this, I had rented a few cars on Turo myself, including the Mark 8 GTI, the Mach-E, the Model X, a couple other cars that you've seen on the channel, but I'd never been on the other side of it. So that's what we're going to talk about in this video today, because it has now been 6 or really almost 7 months since I began renting this car out. Oh, this car. I like this car a lot. I'm still very much in love with this car. It is probably the most fun thing I've ever owned. Not the fastest, obviously, but probably the most fun. But anyway, I just want to start off by talking about markets and seasonality, because I think that's an important sort of disclaimer, I guess, to get out of the way first. You know, obviously, it's logical that certain cars will perform better at certain times of the year, and obviously some markets are going to be bigger than others depending on where you live. Now, I haven't really seen that much of an effect, I guess, from the market. I suspect my effect has been more the time of year, given that this is a two-door rear-wheel drive convertible roadster. So obviously, you know, most people like myself aren't going to enjoy driving it as much in the winter. And frankly, I don't love driving it right now either, most of the time, because I can't have the roof down. Obviously, let me phrase that differently. I still enjoy driving it, but I don't enjoy it to its full extent because it's 90 plus degrees outside and this car's black on black, so it's a bit toasty, even with the air conditioning fully maxed and the windows up to help keep some air in. It's just not necessarily the greatest experience right now either, but still love the car. Anyway, reason being, from December to March, so basically the first half of what I'm about to share, I was living in a much smaller market than I am right now. I'm back in Chapel Hill, North Carolina now as of April, and honestly, business hasn't really been affected, I don't think, by that. It was certainly affected, it felt like, initially, because I got booked like crazy right after I moved back, but I think that was really more just the time of year because it was April and, you know, the weather was starting to get nicer but not overly hot. So anyway, let's jump back to December and talk about sort of the getting started. To be honest, I actually can't quite remember whether I technically listed the car at the end of November or sometime in December of last year, but either way, I didn't actually get my first rental until pretty much the last week of December, so November is effectively irrelevant anyway. So unfortunately, you know, the car was actually supposed to have 2 rentals in December, but only ended up having 1. And in this instance, it was actually my fault because I was new to it and did not block my availability off through the Turo app appropriately. So I had a trip scheduled for a time that slightly conflicted with me being out of town, and I also got my dates mixed up. Didn't realize until like an hour before the trip was supposed to start that, oh shit, it's starting today and not tomorrow. And there was no way for me to get back in time to be able to honor that trip, so I had to cancel it. Because also the guests didn't respond in time. If they had gotten back to me, and said, hey, I can wait another hour or two, whatever, I would have been able to rush and do it. But it got to be like 30 minutes before the trip started, maybe even less actually, and I hadn't heard anything, so I had to cancel, and that was my fault. The second trip for December ended up being perfectly fine, though. It went out just for really only like a day and a half, I think. It was like the 29th to the 30th or the 31st or something. It was somewhere in those dates. But it went perfectly fine. I am also going to talk about earnings in this video. So I had the car listed initially for $55 a day. And with the first trip, I would have netted somewhere around 170 because it was a much longer trip than the one it actually ended up going on, which was only, I guess, technically a 2-day trip because it netted me $66. That is due to the Turo fees and protection plan that I'll talk about towards the end of the video as to why they're taking that much of a cut from the $110 gross that it would have gotten. Jumping ahead to February, I know what you're probably thinking, wait, what about January? Well, the car didn't go out a single time in January, so there's nothing to talk about. Instead, we'll talk about February and March. Now, February actually ended up being a surprisingly good month for the car, despite the absolutely crappy weather that we got, because there was one particular guest who ended up having the car for like 2 weeks or something like that out of the entire month. He initially booked the car for February 5th to the 8th, maybe, if I remember correctly. I really should have written the dates down. I have a whole list of notes down here that I'm looking at, but apparently should have done more. Anyway, he eventually ended up requesting 2 separate extensions to that trip, which brought the trip to 10 or 11 days total. So not quite 2 weeks, like I said, but pretty close, at least over a week and a half. And the guy initially told me that he was doing something in town for school, which was fine, whatever. I have a tracker on the car, so I can see, where it is at any given time and what it's doing. But it appeared, now I don't have any confirmation of this, but it did appear that, in the evenings at night, he was doing some sort of possibly gig work with the car, DoorDash, Uber Eats, that sort of thing. I highly doubt he would be using this car for actual Uber rideshare, given that it only has one other seat and very little luggage space, but DoorDash or Uber Eats is my guess, or Instacart, something like that, something along those lines. Ordinarily, I have no problem with this because that is something that I have done in the past for income as well. So I get it, I'm perfectly fine with doing that or with using this car for that purpose. However, it is against Turo's terms of service. Technically, you are not supposed to use the car that you're renting for any sort of commercial purposes. And so he did violate that. I mean, when it came back, it was a bit dirty, but nothing out of the ordinary. The bigger issue, though, was that a few days after the fact, I noticed that it smelled like smoke because it had sat out in the sun for a couple of days. He had done a very good job of cleaning the interior of the car to hide this. And granted, I don't know if he smoked inside the car or just he himself was a heavy smoker and then spent a lot of time, obviously, in the car doing DoorDash and such. But either way, after the smell kind of ruminated in the sun for a couple of days, it didn't smell the greatest. But obviously, I had no way to prove it, and at that point was outside of Turo's claim window anyway, which is 24 hours after the trip ended. So unfortunately, there wasn't a whole lot I could do about that. But in preparing for this video, I did try to go back and look at the trip receipt and found that that particular gentleman's account had been suspended. So I suspect he tried to do the same thing somewhere else either before or after me and hadn't gotten quite so lucky. So I guess that is kind of justice in a sense. One other flawless trip took place at the end of February, and the month of February ended up netting me $347. Alright, now that I've filled up with the finest Kirkland Signature Costco gasoline over there, all jokes aside, Costco gas isn't actually that bad. It's top tier, so whatever. I should talk about briefly my expenses related to doing this so far, because honestly they're pretty minimal. Luckily I haven't, had any real damage to the car or anything yet. I mean, obviously, yes, the guy that smoked in it and violated TOS is not the greatest start, but honestly, it is what it is. It's gonna happen, and it's gotten better actually since then. It's nothing but up since then, so we'll talk about that after I go get a piece of gourmet Costco pizza as well. But I mean, on the note of gas, I'm not spending any additional money on gas than I would be if I was just driving the car myself, because Turo renters are supposed to return it with the same fuel level it was received, and you can charge extra for reimbursement there if that's not the case, which I have had to do once or twice. Obviously, I have insurance on the car outside of Turo trips, but that, again, is no different than if I was not renting the car out. I pay $20 a month for a car wash membership that allows me to just go through as many times as I need to. So that pays for itself after like 2 washes, technically 1.5, I think. And that's really it. I mean, it takes probably less than an hour tops for me to, prepare the car for each trip, as far as going and running it through the wash and taking the check-in photos and all that, and even less time when the car comes back doing my checkout. So on a per hour basis, it's pretty good, honestly. And, if you have a lockbox, some way to do remote check-in and drop-off, then you're fine to work a regular job or go on trips as normal, do whatever you need to do. So with that said, I'm going to go eat my slice of pizza, and we'll come back and talk about the last couple months. The car went on one trip in March and had absolutely no complaints about that trip either. Netted me about $90. I tell you what, it is honestly not crazy hot today. It's in the mid 80s and it's cloudy, but holy hell, it's still humid. So that's not fun. But anyway, right after I moved in April, the car actually ended up having its best month so far, because it got booked literally like 2 days after I moved and made it available again. It got booked for 2.5 weeks, 18 days, to a gentleman who actually ended up being the one of the VPs at Advance Auto Parts, coincidentally. Super nice guy, no complaints about that trip. But something I did want to touch on is that Turo allows, in most cases, 200 miles a day for the majority of cars. If you have a super high-end vehicle, you can set it to be less than that. Nice 964 there. Anyway, but that 18-day trip, in theory, would have allowed 3,000 miles, a little bit over. So, that's not necessarily the greatest. Obviously, that is totally doable, but it's highly unlikely, I think, for most people to actually do that many miles, because I drive a lot, right? Between my 2 cars, and I barely do 3,000 miles a month total. So in 2 weeks, I guess it is possible. If you're going to take this on a massive road trip, then whatever. But luckily, the guy really just used it for commuting from his hotel to Advance HQ and back, and he actually did less than 200 miles for the entire trip, which I was pleasantly surprised by. So that was actually ended up being a very nice trip, and he would have gotten free airport delivery since the trip was over 2 weeks, but requested that I deliver it to the Advance HQ instead, and then I ended up picking up at the end from his hotel, which was totally fine. As for May, the car ended up going on 4 separate trips, 3 of which were back to back to back within the span of like a week and a half. So that was a little bit chaotic, but ended up actually doing really well as well. Between the 12th and the 19th, yeah, so actually, yeah, within the span of a week, actually, it was enjoyed by 3 separate guests, one of which was another airport delivery. I was going out of town because my girlfriend was graduating college, so I ended up having my friend Mike help me out with that one, which did cut into my profits a little bit. I offered to split the earnings with him in some way or another, but he declined, so I ended up just buying him dinner, which is fine. But that trip would not have been possible without him, because at that point I didn't have a lockbox yet for the key. So huge thank you to Mike on that one again. But anyway, the final weekend of May, the car actually also went out on a third-party rental, which typically I would not do outside of the Turo platform unless you have like an LLC in place and, you know, your own commercial insurance and stuff like that. However, it went to a family friend, actually a coworker of my girlfriend's mom. So it was somebody that we already knew, so I didn't really feel too bad about doing that. And he also loaned me his very nice bright orange Tundra for me to review while he had my car, so that was cool too. In total, that means that April's and May's earnings totaled $893, minus, of course, dinner for Mike and buying gas for the Tundra that I had, just as a courtesy. So most of that was in April, but those 2 months combined, of course, were by far the best ones that we've had yet. As of right now, like I said, it is mid-July, so we just wrapped up June, and June ended up being a little bit odd because the car was supposed to have 3 trips, ended up having 2 actual completed trips, and then 2 canceled trips. One was a 6-day rental right at the beginning of June, which was actually extended slightly from the initial booking. That one was great. That one was fine. A little bit dirty when it came back, but it is what it is. The next booking was a little bit odd again because they ended up breaking, the guest ended up somehow breaking my center air vent here in the car. I'll show you what that looks like, which it's my own fault for not actually getting reimbursement for that, because I thought it was going to be an easy fix. And if you can see here, this is the piece that broke off. It's effectively the little bit that, you know, goes in the center and slides back and forth. I thought this piece was going to snap right back in, so I didn't really worry about it. And then upon further investigation, realized that one of the little clips actually behind the trim piece there is actually also broken, so I can't just throw this back in. And by that point, it was outside of Turo's 24-hour claim window, so couldn't do anything about it. I'm just gonna have to eat this one. And honestly, as you can see, I've just left it since then for the last couple months, and it's fine. The air vent still works, so I'll fix it eventually, but it is what it is. Then we had one where I actually had my first no-show, which I don't know how often this actually happens, but out of a dozen or so trips so far, I've only had one. So maybe it's not incredibly often, but essentially what happened with that trip was it was supposed to get picked up at like 11 in the morning on whatever day it was, Thursday or Friday, I think. And then it was gonna go until the same time on Monday. So essentially the whole weekend. An hour before the trip, obviously, I sent my automated message through Turo saying, hey, you know, car's ready for you. Here's where it is. Here's the code for the lockbox. Let me know if you have any questions or anything. And then the guy messaged back and said, you know, hey, I'm going to be pretty busy this morning, but I'll pick the car up mid-afternoon if that's fine. And I said, yep, no problem. Just let me know when you've got it. Whatever, the key's in the lockbox, it's fine to sit out there for a couple hours. However, when I came home from work at like 9:30 at night, the car was still there. So I was like, okay, that's odd. So I sent the guy a message, you know, hey, everything all right? You know, I just noticed the car's still here because I got home from work and I thought that was, you know, I thought you were going to pick it up in the afternoon. So what's going on? He didn't respond for like an hour, and then said, hey, I'm at some dinner thing. I can be there within the next hour if that's fine. And I was like, well, I kind of don't really want to leave my key out anymore. You know, even if it is in a lockbox, I'd like to go to bed, because it's like 10:30 at this point, and I don't really want to leave my key out overnight if I don't have to. So I called Turo support. They actually told me that I could cancel the trip or report it as a no-show, and they'll cancel it after the first hour. At this point, it had been like 10 hours. So, needless to say, I had them cancel the trip. And since it was after the trip start time and the cancellation effectively came from the guest at that point, it was physically done by Turo support, but for all intents and purposes, it was the guest canceling because he didn't show up. I still got paid the majority of the earnings for that trip. So that was actually kind of nice. That actually turned out all right, because I got the earnings and I keep my car for the weekend. So June ended up netting $336, which was pretty decent again. Not as good as obviously the past 2 months that it just had, but still perfectly fine. As of now, like I said, we're in July, so we've earned $151 in July so far, and then the trip that this car is getting ready to go on tomorrow, as of filming, will bring in another $99, so that'll be about $250 total for July, unless it gets booked again before the end of the month, which it very well may, because this trip was actually booked like 2 or 3 days ago, so it was kind of last minute as well. As of right now, nothing scheduled for August yet, which is a little odd, but we do have one for September, so that's a little bit too far out to really worry about yet. But it's honestly doing pretty well so far. So the total earnings thus far for this year, and I believe this is actually just January through July, are, I'll put it up on the screen, but it's a little over $1,700. And then I have $207 in upcoming earnings from what's already booked. Well, the GoPro battery died, which was really annoying because I was almost done with the video, but it's all right because I was gonna go home after that anyway, so here we are. The only other thing that I was going to talk about really before I wrap up was the protection plans that I mentioned briefly at the beginning, and the add-ons that Turo allows you to offer, or the sort of extra items that you can sell, or rent rather. So for those that are unfamiliar, which if you're not a Turo host, you probably are unfamiliar, there are 5 levels of protection plans that you can choose from, and you can have different plans on each car that you have if you have more than one. Starting with, on the low end, there is what they call the 60 plan, which essentially means that you're going to be keeping 60% of your gross earnings. You're forfeiting 40% of your earnings to Turo for this plan. However, you have a $0 deductible, and it covers more things than any other plan. On the opposite end, you have the 90 plan, which, as the name suggests, you get 90% of your earnings, but you have like a $2,500 deductible, and it doesn't cover your loss of income, it doesn't cover replacement vehicle, it doesn't cover a whole lot of other things that the lower tiers offer. So with this being my first car on Turo and my first sort of hosting experience, I went ahead and went with the 60 plan, and am still on it, in fact, just really for peace of mind. Now that I'm, a dozen or so trips in, I could probably bump up to the 75 or whatever plan is next, and just keep, a few extra dollars per trip, because I haven't really had anything major happen. But the way I look at it is, the extra money that I would be earning, or keeping rather, the deductible on that next step up is like $250. So at $55 or $60 a day, the car would have to go on at least 10 trips to be able to just pay for the deductible. 10 trips without anything happening, I should say, just to pay for the deductible when something does happen. So I still feel a little bit safer on the 60, but really that's up to you. Turo also allows you to offer additional extras that you can include in your rental if you would like. Things like everything from unlimited mileage to prepaid gas like a normal rental car, or, you know, if you have like camping gear or some sort of other, you know, item that you think your guests might enjoy with your car, and you can offer it. I have unlimited mileage and prepaid refuel because frankly there's not really anything else that I can offer with this car at the moment, so it is what it is. And as of right now, my take rate for those things has been 0, which is fine. You know, I had one guy actually one thing that I forgot to mention with one of the June trips. A guy had this car for literally like a day and a half and drove from here in North Carolina down to Atlanta and back. So he actually doubled the mileage limit because that would have been 400 miles for the 2-day rental. And he ended up doing just under 800 miles. But I guess he decided that the mileage overage charge, which is like 27 or 28 cents a mile, I think, that would actually be cheaper than paying for the unlimited mileage on a per day basis, I should say. Because I think I have it set to an extra $50 or $60 a day. So he ended up paying like $110 total, I think, for the extra mileage. So virtually about the same, but I guess he calculated that it would be slightly cheaper. So anyway, that is what it is, and no harm, no foul, because I got paid either way. Ultimately, I feel safer renting this car than any number of others. I feel like most people thus far that have rented it have been into cars in one way or another. I mean, obviously you have to at least know how to drive manual to be able to drive this car in the first place. And from talking to a few of them, I know that quite a few of them are actual car enthusiasts. And let's be real, nobody's going to be renting a Miata to go show off or go street racing or anything like that. I mean, it's not a particularly flashy or fast vehicle, so, you know, I think it's probably a little bit safer than renting out like, you know, a Mustang or even my Charger that's over there behind me. So thus far, it's been, like I said, totally fine. And in conclusion, has it been profitable? No. But it has at least, for the most part, pretty much paid for itself every month. And that's honestly fine because I get to enjoy the car for at least half the month still and have the ability to keep having 2 cars for a while. So honestly, I'm pretty happy with how the Turo rentals have gone so far. There's been really 2 issues out of, like I said, the dozen or so trips that the car's been on, which isn't a terrible percentage basis. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with it so far. But that said, if you have any questions or anything that I forgot to address, leave a comment down below. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up or consider subscribing for plenty more content with this car and others.